Okay, I'm going to be talking through some notes. I'm on page 3 of your packet, so if you could turn to page 3, and you're going to be filling in some blanks here as I talk about it. So let's first read through it. So we're going to be talking about a 5 statistical summary, and the 5 statistical summary is made up of 5 parts. The first one is the minimum value for the data set, the maximum value, the median, the first quartile, and the third quartile. So we're going to be talking about this. So we talked about a day ago what the median is. The median is the exact middle of the data set. If you have an even amount of data points and you average the two in the middle. And then once we have the median, we can further separate the data into what we call quartiles. Quartiles separate the original data set into 4 equal parts. That makes sense, quartiles, so we put it up into 4 different quarters. So the first quarter is called the first quartile, and then we'll have the second quartile. The second quartile is the median, and then the third quartile is the upper middle. Quartiles are percentiles that divide the data into fourths. So looking at this little bar here, we're going to have the minimum value and the maximum value. And then we have the median in the middle, which is also called the second quartile. And then if we're looking at the first half of our numbers, the middle of the first half is called the first quartile, and the middle of the second half is called the third quartile. So we need to know what each of these values mean. All right, so we're going to be talking about, this is an example of a set of test scores. So the maximum to get on a test is 100%. The minimum student scored 65%. So we have a median of about 80. So if I average, I'm going to take into account the middle of my first half would be 70, and the middle of my second half would be 90. Now, notice that it isn't the average of the minimum and the median. So I'm not taking an average, it's just a string of numbers, and whatever that middle number is between the minimum and the median is the first quartile. Whatever the middle number is between the median and the maximum is the third quartile, not the average. Okay. While we do not know every test score, we do know that half of the scores is below 80 and half is above 80. We also know that half of the scores are between 70 and 90. The difference between the third and first quartiles, so the difference between the third quartile and the first, so it would be 90 minus 20, is called the interquartile range. So if this makes up 50% of our numbers, that means that 25% is between the minimum and the first quartile, and 25% is between the third quartile and the maximum. So interquartile range, you guys need to know this value. It's called, it's abbreviated as IQR, and it's taking the third quartile and subtracting the first quartile. Now, we're going to talk about box and whisker plots. And you guys probably saw box and whisker plots a long time ago, so we want to refresh your memory. And the nice thing about a box and whisker plot is it represents this 5 statistical summary. So by looking at a box and whisker plot, you know the minimum, maximum, median, first quartile, and third quartile. You know all 5 of those. It's much easier and nicer to look at this diagram and be able to see trends than just plain numbers. So it's very important that you always represent your data. With visuals. Visuals are super important. So this graph is a visual. So it's much better than just saying 65, 70, 80, 90, and 100. All right. So let's see how we'd put each of these statistics, into this diagram. So Probably the most self-explanatory is the minimum value is going to be this value here. So our minimum value is 65, so we put 65 here. Our maximum value is 100, so it's going to be the furthest point to the right. So here is our 100. Then these are called the whiskers. So we have the box and then the whiskers. The whiskers are the points on either side, so the minimum and maximum value. Now the box consists of the interquartile range. Remember, interquartile range is the first quartile, median, and third quartile. So I'm going to have my lower quartile as the first line, my median as the line in the middle of the box, and my upper quartile as my last line of the box. So I have 70, 80, and 90. If you want to figure out the interquartile range from a box and whisker plot, you take either side of the box, you find the difference of that, and you have the interquartile range. Now, looking at this example here, let's go over what the minimum value is. So the minimum value is going to be here. So minimum is equal to, let's see, 50, this is going to be 60. I say we can estimate that as 56. And this point right here, the first of my box, that's going to be the first quartile. I can estimate that as 65. My median is going to be 80. And my third quartile here, let's say 94. And then my whisker here, my maximum, is 100. Now, this is my estimation from this box and whisker plot. But what about this star here? Let's talk about this star. Sometimes there is one piece of data that falls well outside the range. This is called an outlier. So we don't include outliers in our box and whisker plot. If we chose to include the outlier, then it skews our results, it skews our data. And there's many reasons and factors based on what data you're observing or you have for your experiment or survey. But outliers are things that are well away from the rest of your data, and you usually don't want to include that in your statistical analysis because it skews your results. So if the outlier is included in the whisker, readers may think that there are grades dispersed through the whole range from this first quartile to the outlier, which is not true. So if I extended this whisker, my minimum value, all the way out to the outlier, people would assume that people got grades between 10 through 55. So if this is a test score, I'm going to assume that a lot of people failed. But really, not a lot of people failed. In fact, a majority of the students passed. However, I wouldn't be able to assume that if I drew my whisker all the way out to this outlier. So this 10% is maybe somebody who had been in Mexico for the week or had been out for a week because they were sick and they had no instruction and didn't know what to do. All right, so to avoid this misconception, we use an asterisk or a star, which explains that this is an outlier. It's out of the ordinary value.